Amelia Island is a lot like any quaint town you might find across America, especially on the seaboard. It reminds me, when I look at it, of small towns in Cape Cod, of places that I've seen in North Carolina. It has the odd mixture, making it somewhat unique from those places, of the historic feel of Tallahassee mixed with the oceanside kind of aesthetic, the salt life world, if you will, of places like Key West, of Venice, of any one of towns that I've never actually been to in Florida. It's the kind of town that when you're driving along and you're on the main strip, you are very much connected to the modern world. But slip just slightly off of those streets and you'll find yourself smack dab in quintessential historical northern Florida. And if you take one of those roads, 7th Avenue, and you find yourself on the corner of 7th and Ash, you'll find the old house of Kate Bailey. Kate Bailey moved into the house with her husband, Efferingham, greatest name ever, in 1895. There's no record of them ever having any children, but Kate lived what she thought was the ideal life. She was living in Florida, which everyone loves. She was with the man of her dreams in the house that she had helped to oversee. And in that Queen Anne home, she had everything that she wanted. And what she enjoyed most to do was to look outside her front window and see the large oak tree planted before she had moved in, standing as almost like a guardian from the outside world into her happy little home. As the years went by, her husband passed away. She thought of moving to someplace else, but decided that this was her home. And as the years went on, she got more and more comfort from that tree in her front yard. Until they decided to change the road. And the city planners decided that that tree was in the way and had to be taken down. They sent her letters telling them when they were going to come and chop it down. They asked her politely to offer assistance to the people who might be there to work. But Kate couldn't say goodbye. It was really the only thing that she had left. And when those workers arrived with their saws and their axes to chop down that tree, they found Kate sitting under it with a shotgun. She said every man in that work group would fall before her beloved tree would. Now, the men didn't want any trouble. They called their supervisors. The supervisors came in and tried to talk to her about it, but she would not relent. She refused to leave. She refused to let them take the last thing that she loved. Well, word eventually got to the town council. Word got to the town planners, all of whom came out to see Kate and try to reason with her. She was obstructing the reinvigoration of the town. These roads had to be laid in. And yet, every time they came, they were met with her, standing or sitting underneath that oak tree, shotgun in hand, refusing to budge. Eventually, everyone just kind of decided to let her have her way. They built the road around the tree. If you go there today, you can still see Kate's oak tree, although she's passed on years ago. right down the road, a straight road until you get to her house, and then a little bit of a curve, allowing the tree to grow where it does still to this day. You can go there and check it out yourself, and if it's a clear night and the moon is shining bright enough so it casts shadows over that small house on 7th and Ash, you're prone to see the ghost of Kate Bailey sitting underneath that tree still today, shotgun in hand, translucent, but still standing guard for the one thing left she has in this world. My name is Christopher Balzano, and welcome to Tripping on Legends. I hope you guys enjoyed that story. That is one of the stories that I came across, one of the ghostly tales I came across when I was doing research for tonight's show and for the legend trip that is going to accompany it. The good thing about this, spoilers, if you are following our social media, you know that we've already been to this place. Deanna Mulhern and I actually were able to go there last week and do this legend trip, but we're going to pretend. Right? We're going to sit back, we're going to pretend that none of you have seen the live videos that were posted on Facebook, because you are following us at facebook.com/trippingonlegends. I'm hoping that everyone here will close their eyes and misremember having seen some of the shots and live video we took on our Instagram feed at Spooky Tripping. Hopefully all of you will not even remember that I have a Twitter, which most of you don't, which is at Spooky Balzano. If you are following us on any of these social media feeds, you'll understand that we have been to this place and we have kind of touched we've touched what's going on in the two locations that I'm going to talk about tonight. But we're going to pretend tonight that none of that has happened, right? We're going to live... Wow, that was crazy. Everything just fell right there. We're going to live in a delusional world pretending that this is like the old school show, where I have one show that sets up that we're going to be going someplace, and then a few weeks later we go there, because this was like an old school Tripping on Legends. It kind of had all the elements that you've come to enjoy from some of those older episodes in terms of having a trigger, having a backstory which makes no sense, but which we try to make sense of. It really has all those things. And tonight we're going to be talking about two amazing locations in North Florida. I never hear it referred to as North Florida. It's always referred to as Northern Florida. I wonder why that is. I have no idea. This state still to this day baffles me. A little bit of homework first, before we get into the haunted lifeguard station and the ghosts of Fort Clinch. As many of you know who have been following me, I have been working on, for History Press, my next book, which is called Haunted Ocala National Forest. I am happy to say Haunted Ocala National Forest has been sent to the printer. Now, it actually hasn't been sent to the printer, as we all know. There's a huge process that goes along with publishing a book. But my second Florida book is now in the publisher's hands, and I'm just waiting to hear from the editor, do the galleys, and then get it out to you. And I'm hoping that it's going to be out in time for September of 2002. So this Halloween, you'll be able to settle down with two fantastic Balzano books. You'll be able to settle down with, of course, Haunted Florida Love Stories, and now Haunted Ocala. And so the next thing is like, well, what's the next big thing that you're going on? And I'm actually working on two projects right now. One of which I'm calling out for people to respond with whatever they have. And we have a few shows back, we did one called Whistling Past the Cemetery, where we talked about all of these different rituals that have to do with a cemetery. So that's really the focus of what I'm writing right now. It's called Whistling Past the Cemetery, and it's urban legends and urban legend rituals, more importantly, legend tripping rituals that have to do with cemeteries. So if you have a story that you think would fit perfectly in for this, I'm looking for not just in Florida. I've got plenty of Florida ones. I'm looking for all across the country. So if you're listening to this in any part of the country, obviously, I have quite a few New England listeners, but wherever you are, if you're in Oregon, shout out to Nancy. If you're in Utah, if you're in Iowa, if you're in California, I am looking for your local legend trip cemetery where you have to do some kind of ritual. And I'll be promoting it. I already have a Facebook page up for it. You can follow kind of the progress on that at hashtag Whistling Cemeteries. And I'm really excited about this book. I think it's going to be the first one officially that I'm going to write with the mindset of it's going to be published independently. And it's going to be just one of these little pop, 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 almost like a coffee book of all of these different stories. And if you have a story to share, you can, of course, share it to me at facebook.com/trippingonlegends. You can share it via my Instagram at spooky tripping, or you can email me at spookytripping@gmail.com. So when we talk about ghost stories, when we talk about haunted legends, there are a lot of ways that haunted legends fall into my lap. Sometimes I get emailed from somebody, which doesn't happen nearly as much as I want it to. Sometimes someone hears an episode and they reach out over the course of the episode, and of course you can call in for anything having to do with tonight's show, or call me anytime at 813-418-6822. This one came about because I was actively looking for a place. And I was looking for a place that fit a very specific criteria, and that criteria was I wanted it to be on Amelia Island. As I do every year, I sent out all these invitations to listen to Christopher Balzano ramble on and on at your library, your function. And one of the responses I got was from Northern Florida, right? Amelia Island. I had to look up where it was because I had totally forgotten that that we had done an episode, like probably 3-4 years ago, where we talked about, I believe it was the Witch of Wikidemos, or the Wikidemos Witch, in Fernandina Island, and we had really planned to go out there. It was our episode about the three witches. We covered Bella in Tallahassee. Of course, we did the Swamp Witch, which then became its own thing, and then we did that one as well. So, but I still had to look it up, and I was like, all right, I'm going there. I want to find like the most interesting urban legend there. I want to trip the ghost there. Does Northern Florida, being in my mind, being a town kind of built on the military, right? I think Jacksonville. I think that Jacksonville is one of those places that's like built around an army base or a navy base, right? Like it's really one of those places that people don't stay there. Little did I know that it is bursting in ghostly legends. And one of the things I did in preparation for it was I got this book, so I always like to cite my sources. So this is Ghost of Amelia and Other Tales by Maggie Cotter DeVries. This was where I got the story about Kate Bailey, and it gave me the inside track on some other legends that I thought like, oh wow, those are going to be really interesting when I go there to do the event. The event came and went. I loved it. It was amazing. People were really big into the ghostly legends of that town, and I found out that it was very much a place that people have been for a really long time. So it doesn't have that generational aspect of it that we always talk about, but it was one of those places where the people took a great pride in the town, and they loved where they were living, and they had a lot of ghost stories. It reminded me a lot of Astor in that way. But I was alone. As part of the bargain for having me travel all the way to North Florida, they said, all right, we can't pay the extra money to have you stay overnight so you can get a hotel. But what we can do is we can allow you to stay at a bed and breakfast that is under kind of the Historical Society's umbrella. Wow, great, perfect, amazing, like better than a hotel. I get to be in a location, probably has some kind of haunted history to it, all that. I finished the event, and I was like, you know what? Legend tripping is not fun when you're by yourself. And I was by myself. And so I went home. I drove the 6 hours. I hopped in my car. I got my free cookies from the bed and breakfast. Wrote them a note saying had to see about a girl. I didn't have to see about a girl. And drove home because legend tripping is not fun by yourself. So all this research I had done, all this, the page after page that I'd gone through, I had already taken notes about the location. All were kind of put to naught as I just kind of pushed it off. And I figured it would be a really long time until I went back. Come break, and as you know, I'm a teacher, and it was like, well, what am I going to do? And the original plan where the kids and I were going to do a Tripping on Legends with Kids trip to the Upper Keys to look into all of those hauntings we had talked about, the haunt stories of the hurricane of 1935. Like, that was like, wow, that's a really good time. We can do this. And then I kind of got nervous about having the kids out, COVID, different places, all these different locations. And I was like, and it also became a lot of travel for these different spots, which may or may not have anything to it. So it wasn't like there were necessarily cemeteries or... And then it was, okay, well, I'm going back to Amelia Island. I have to go there because there were two stories there that were really pushing me forward. And so I reopened all of that stuff. And started doing more research to discover what exactly is it about these two locations that I can hold on to. So the first location. This is often cited, and I'm not sure if it's self-serving. It can't be though, right? Both of the stories tonight have the feeling and the appeal of that supposed to be haunted aspect. I often talk about a place that, because of the way it looks or what happens there or the way people interact with it, it just has to be haunted. It's supposed to be haunted. Cemeteries, which are abandoned or forsaken or forgotten. That creepy house down the street from you. Asylums, right? Haunted asylums. Hospitals, things like that. And then I came across what is considered everywhere you look. In every haunted.org and ghost.com and all these places, the Shadowlands, like, they all seem to peg newspaper article after newspaper article. They all seem to peg this one spot in Jacksonville Beach as the most haunted location in all of Florida. Now, like I said, it would seem to be self-serving, except for the fact that it's not a haunted restaurant, right? You can't buy food there. It's not a haunted hotel. You can't stay there. There really is no money to be made from the idea that this location is haunted. It's not as if more people find their way to Jacksonville Beach because of the haunting that's there. It doesn't serve a purpose. So when I hear about a location, when I hear about a haunted legend, it has to do with a location that does not benefit from the fact that it's haunted. A hitchhiker ghost on a certain strip of road, a bridge that you don't have to pay to get onto, a haunted lifeguard scene. So on Jacksonville Beach, now this I didn't know, Jacksonville Beach was originally called Pablo Beach. There is the pictures that I initially saw are very inaccurate. It makes it seem as if it's a beach house. There is a station which is formally called Station Number 1 because it was the first one built, right on the beach, facing the beach at Jacksonville Beach. It is officially known as the Jacksonville Beach Lifeguard Station or the Jacksonville Beach Red Cross Lifeguard Station. It's actually had a lot of names over the years. People who are in the know just call it Station Number 1. It was originally opened in 1907. That area of Jacksonville had become more and more popular. There were more people going out there, and along with that, there were a ton of accidents. So, with all these accidents, people started to say, we need to officially have lifeguards on the beach. So, as part of the Lifeguard Saving Corps, the U.S. Volunteer Lifeguard Saving Corps. What a great name. U.S. Volunteer Lifeguard Saving Corps, which is amazing if you don't have to put it on a shirt. They started to patrol. Now, they wanted some place where people could go, where people could check in from, that had a high area so that you could see across the beach in the different locations. That could be a place where the volunteers, because it was all volunteer at that time, would be able to check in, check out, rest, sleep if they needed to. And so they started in 1913, officially, Station Number 1 was complete. And it was made of wood, which if you're living in Florida, and if you know where Jacksonville is in Florida. So Jacksonville is in North Florida. It's kind of right on the edge of probably an hour and a half away from the border of Georgia. It is the anti-panhandle. So the panhandle goes to the left. America, the East Coast, goes to the right, and it kind of swoops up. It is the catch-all for every storm going up the East Coast, right? People in Jacksonville, more than any other location, just because of the way weather is, which I could not comment on intelligently, it seems to be the touch point of a lot of different storms. They either hit slightly north but Jacksonville always seems to be, as we say here, in the cone. It was a horrible building for that reason, right? So it almost immediately, they had to start working on a new one, right? So they ended up building a new one, right? Because they were fixing up. In 1920, they built a new one. So they tore it down completely. They built a new one. This one was less temporary of a structure. Blah blah blah. That was seen as obsolete, and so they tore that down in 1946. And in 1948, the current building went up. Now, you know I love a good history story and kind of getting into the way things are and the history of a location. But this is really important. The building went up in 1948. The trigger for really this whole thing was that this beautiful young nurse had died. So in 1912, kind of at the height of their decision of what they were going to do, this woman died. And she was a young, beautiful nurse who had her whole life ahead of her. And it kind of marks the unofficial documenting of tragedy in that location. Now, the weird thing is that this is a lifeguard station, right? So this is kind of a clubhouse. It is one of several entrances to the beach, and yet it seems to be the focal point of the hauntings that are there, right? So why are they in the building? Now, the weird thing is that if you do the research for this, they will tell you the ghosts come from different locations, right? Or there's a different backstory for the ghosts. One of the most popular is that before it was a lifeguard station, Other people have said it was a hospital. And this is kind of important in that it said that it was a hospital and a lot of people had died there over the years, making it the perfect location. That's supposed to be haunted thing. Location was never a hospital. However, what it is a place where people go as they're being taken from the beach. In theory, waiting for ambulances to go to a hospital. In theory, they are saved in one location and brought here, and maybe people die. That people have actually died on their way. That the lifeguard station is a beacon for all of those who have died in the water. Many nights people see, especially in the early morning, they see ghost lights going down this path, leading to the station goes from the beach to the road, stopping at the building, and disappearing if they're going inside. People have heard cries for help from the water, and then they go and there's no one there. This only happens right directly in front of the station itself. There are reports of a ghostly figure who runs as if trying to save someone from the station down into the water, and the person disappears when they reach the actual beach. Now, all of these are signs of tragedy. How do you trip this, right? Like, what do you do? Like, take the person you're with and throw them into the water, right? But I think that there's a way to do it, which is internal, right? It's a perfect thing, right? It's really hard to go into the cemetery and sit amongst the headstones and wait for something to happen. But I can do that kind of trip. Sitting on a beach, waiting for the sun to rise, checking to make sure that something is going on. Maybe walk up and down that passage, right? Walk up and down that trail and see if you can get someone to communicate with you. Over the years, and I think this is one of those situations where the tail is wagging the dog. There has been, and we encountered this. We talked a little bit about this. I was actually going to do a whole show just on this phenomenon, which is ghost investigators, paranormal investigators, changing the narrative of locations. So this is one of those places in Lillian Place, where everyone was saying Lucy instead of Lillian or Lucille, and so the stories have changed. People seem to be focused on this ghost named Todd. And they say that this man who runs out into the water, his name is Todd. They've gotten that name on EVPs. Now, I say EVPs is in plural, but nothing is ever clear. When people talk about it, it's always paranormal investigators using equipment got the name Todd. It's really interesting to me how this name Todd, how this Todd has now attached himself to the legend, and people just talk about Todd. The ghost name is Todd, the ghost name. That might be the man, but there's more than one ghost there. And also, how do we know it wasn't some other, misunderstanding of the EVP? And yet Todd is now part of the legend. Now, people say that Todd was a lifeguard, and that, so an entire backstory, even though it hasn't been confirmed by any records, and any of the research I've done. This would be a good opportunity, if you can, to find someone and see if you can talk to them, who knows the history of it. But I've searched all the newspaper archives, and I cannot find any report. And we're talking 1912, right? We're talking, 100 years. Newspaper.com goes back 100 years easy. Todd was supposed to be a lifeguard himself. And he went out into the water to save somebody. He saved the person, but he died himself. And so now he comes back, just like we covered in all those stories, right? And in haunted love stories, he goes back time and time again to try to save people who are on the beach, even though there are no people drowning. And I think that is. I think it's a very romantic story. Obviously not romantic as in, how you doing, kind of romantic, but romantic in terms of like we see a ghost, we fall back on the story, like all the shit that makes up haunted Florida love story kind of ideas, hashtag haunted love. But this idea that he died saving somebody, right? Like, how connected is that? How relatable is that? How much is that something that we want to have achieved ourselves? If we have to die, and we all have to die, the news is out. If you don't know, you're going to die someday. Coming off the holidays with the great South Park song, Dead, 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 you're going to die. But how you lived is going to be a testament to who you are. And Todd saving those souls, saving whoever he saved, makes him eternal and makes his life worthwhile, and is something we hope, if we have to die, we can do it in some kind of heroic way like that. I will continue to look through the newspapers to see if I can find any obituary whatsoever related to Todd, or any report of the accident related to Todd. These are things that should be out there. It's not like that famous or infamous explanation of why no one ever dies in Disney is that Disney covers it up. The school system covers it up because they don't. Walmart covers up the abductions. It's not that kind of situation. Lifeguards die. I don't remember it ever happening in Baywatch, but I'm sure it did. Lifeguards die. There's another story which, once again, real interesting in terms of perpetuating itself. I read in the comments of, I want to say haunted.com or hauntedplaces.com. I read the story in the comments, right? That's always where I go. The good stuff is in the comments. And it was a man, or it was a girlfriend of a man, who used to work as a lifeguard there. So when someone has direct contact, when someone does something, that's when you kind of have to put your ears up and be like, okay, what's going on? He said, this poster said that the activity was more in the building, and that everyone considered it haunted, and everyone who spent any amount of time there had some weird story to tell. People being woken up at night, people going to get their equipment and it's not there, people tripping on stuff on their way out that was put away. Almost things to be preventing people from saving lives. But the reason why this person gave, the reason why the ghosts were there, was because the station itself, good old station number 1, was a rape house. That the male lifeguards who dominated the building were known to have wild parties. Especially back in the day, were known to have wild parties to kind of whoop it up, to get as many of the bikini clad or the bathing suit clad women as they can to go back into station number 1 for parties, and that it was a known thing kind of by everybody that these lifeguards, who were somewhat protected on high, were rapists, right? That these parties, it was like a frat house, and it had all the reputation, all the rumors and urban legends of a frat house, and that it was there was a constant party going on, and oftentimes women were being raped. And these ghosts that people are seeing, especially the ghost lights are the ghosts of the women who had been raped. Now, that's something we've talked about only a little bit on the show before. Like, we really have focused on because we're concerned about the story as opposed to the physics or the potential of ghosts. Like, what is a ghost? What can make a ghost? Those kind of things. Because we focus more on the story of it, we haven't talked too much about this idea of trauma causing ghosts as opposed to just death. You die, you're a ghost, you're at that location, deal with it. But there is all this other stuff in terms of imprinting yourself on a location. So these rapes, and trying to escape these rapes, and hence these figures rushing out of the house or trying to get out of the house, or stopping, trying to prevent the lifeguards from doing their job, potentially to be able to distract them to get away. This has the feel of that kind of a ghost. Now, obviously, there's no way to legend trip that, and a modern day lifeguard probably doesn't know about that situation, might have heard urban legends or stories about it, so it'd be really hard to follow up on the facts of that. But I will tell you this. In my research, I've found that almost from the start, I'm trying to see if I have the date on it. I don't think I do. Because at the time I was thinking it wasn't that important of a fact, even though I highlighted it when I read it. There was almost always a pretty even amount, according to the history on the actual Red Cross lifeguard station website. Women were as frequently in that building as men. That almost from the beginning, there was a concerted effort to have as many male lifeguards as female lifeguards. That they really wanted it to be an even split. The women were trained. There's pictures. There's old-timey pictures of the female lifeguards. And so, whereas it sounds like it would be the perfect place for there to be this boys' club, this frat house, which would cause trauma and potentially trap energy and create ghosts, the facts seem to play out that it was a pretty even split between men and women. Now, that's not saying that there still couldn't be a frat mentality about it, that women still couldn't have been sexually assaulted there. But it definitely puts that moment of pause in me believing that part of it. It's going to be an interesting location. We, for all that we've done on Tripping on Legends, and if you haven't gone into our archives and listened to the over 150 episodes that we have in there, there haven't been too many beach stories, right? Which is crazy because we think of Florida as the land of beaches. And yet we've only even really talked about Gasparilla Island, which is a place I would love to go. We've only touched upon that a little bit. Most of the places we've gone to, if there is a beach, it's like Fort DeSoto, or it's like Ormond Beach, where it's like not really a beach. It's kind of like a whole bunch of sand, a little bit of sand, a whole bunch of rocks and water. This is the first one where I'm gonna have to wear flip-flops. I've never worn flip-flops on a legend trip before. I try to avoid wearing flip-flops whenever possible, especially because, you know, if you're like me, you find that one pair of flip-flops that lasts you a ton of time, and then when it's gone, it's almost impossible it takes years sometimes to replace it. I'm like that. So I recently lost my flip-flops, and I have been devastated. So feel free, if you want to support the show, to send me flip-flops or send me money for the flip-flops, and I'll give you a shout-out on the show. I'll give you a high five with the flip-flop itself. I have now said the word flip-flop so many times that it's lost all meaning for me. So I think that's probably a really good time to talk about the second location. And this is the one I'm more drawn to. If I didn't have a job, if I could dedicate myself to hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of research and tracking shit down and doing things, there's an idea, and I know that Natalie and I had talked about it, and we had dropped it into a few episodes. It obviously came back up when I started doing This Town is Myth, and that's the idea of Ghosts of the New Deal. That when you search across all of these different locations that have been touched, formed, manipulated by, birthed by the New Deal, FDR's New Deal, first 100 days and all that kind of good stuff. For all my civics people out there, there are so many haunted locations that have a connection to it, right? I mean, the CCC might as well be like the paranormal, the paranormal hotspot, right? Like, it's two things in one. And I always do this. I forget what CCC stands for. Civilian Corps. It's that. I was talking about this. I have this black hole in my brain for certain things. I usually can't point to conservation. I think is Civilian Conservation Corps. Please, someone who's in the live chat, please let me know. All of these different locations, Freetown, was where it first kind of sparked. And if you look, I posted pictures of the statue at good old Fort Clinch, which is where we're going to be talking about, and Freetown State Forest, and it was like the same guy, right? And so today in class, we were talking about the ideal male. Like, what is the ideal male form? Who would you say is the perfect male body? Right? I know. I don't... Trust me, it has to do with language arts, even though it doesn't sound like it. And so I had the kids go out, and I had the kids look for things, and of course, half of them were joking. Thank you. Civilian Conservation Corps. Thank you very much, Amanda. And of course, SpongeBob, right? And people were putting, and the funny part was, the kids then found pictures of me, like really bad pictures of me on the internet, and they put that into the slideshow for the perfect body, and like, ha ha ha. But the people who you think would be the ones who were named were the ones who were named, right? So it was, Ryan Reynolds and The Rock, and of course, because of incidents in recent days, there was a lot of Antonio Brown pictures. Jordan and Steph Curry. So I was kind of in this mindset, and so I looked up the statues of the CCC, and they're all the same guy. It's all the same body. This was the body that was put forth, it has been put forth as the ultimate New Deal CCC worker. They all look the same. They're wearing the same hat. Most of them have the same axe in their hand, including the one that stands guard at the mouth or the entrance of Fort Clinch in Amelia Island. I love an army base ghost story. There's something about being at that kind of location. Maybe because we preserve it so well. Lighthouses and military bases are living, breathing museums. Even though the guns don't work. Even though the artifacts are silly. Even though no one's actually sleeping in that bed of the barracks. They seem to come alive. Supposed to be haunted. Right? The supposed to be haunted factor going on. We're talking about times of war. We're talking about a situation where the dead died giving that last full measure of themselves, to horribly quote Abe Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address. And this does relate to the Civil War. So essentially what happens is that as America is kind of going through, and I really want to cite the sources on this as well. In addition to having, from various websites and stuff like that, I once again the ghosts of Amelia and other tales from Maggie Carter, DeVires, has some stuff on that. But the big, at least for the history parts of it, were these two books, who are both by Frank Ofelt. Frank A. Ofelt III, who is actually also a reenactor at Fort Clinch, and he wrote these books. So I got to do a shout out because they're my publisher as well. Couldn't get them to me for free, huh? Fort Clinch, Fernandina, and the Civil War, and then if you love history, you love these books. The Images of America series on Fort Clinch. So both of these are written by Frank Ofelt, and Frank A. Ofelt III, and I want to give a shout out to him, and I'll put links so that you guys can purchase these books. Once again, like the Images of America series is great, so if any location that you have, I think they even have one in Cape Coral, and I'm like, how the hell are there images of Cape Coral that are worth taking pictures of? But anyway, it's there. So, just a brief history before we get into this, because it's obviously tied into the ghost stories that are there. We won the Revolutionary War. Happy New Year to you too, Dave. We won the Revolutionary War. America, right? We're here. We love it. We are the birthplace of democracy. Only problem is we pretty much got our ass kicked for most of the war. And that's because other than privateers and hired pirates, we had no navy. But more importantly, we hadn't really set up ways to protect the coast, right? And so the British were able to kind of sneak in to all these different locations, including places in Florida, and get the materials to where they needed to go, right? We win. We decide to start making these garrisons, making these forts along the coasts to protect, and also to kind of protect us going out as well. And they're horrible bases, right? They're pretty much like tents and lean-tos and these little Hoovervilles all across the coast. And War of 1812, because they're so shoddy, they're able to go into Washington, right? They're able to burn down the White House, or burn the White House, right? And so we realized we needed a permanent place, and they started to build in all these different locations. One of the two most important ones that were conceived during this time is Fort Clinch, which is what we're going to talk about, in Jacksonville. Key West, which was Fort Taylor, and the Monticellos. And if you have read Haunted Florida Love Stories, you know about the tension it being called Fort Taylor might have caused, and potentially having it become haunted. Oddly enough, they don't talk about Fort DeSoto. I can't remember when Fort DeSoto was opened, but I know Egmont Key was an important protection against Tampa Bay, but I didn't see that mentioned anywhere. But we start to build these bases. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Florida is not really Florida, right? So even though Amelia Island and where Fort Clinch is really started to be occupied in 1736, it's not America, right? Like, it goes back and forth between Spanish and American control. And then in 1847, it's officially made a base, right? Like, they really start construction on it. Now, here's the weird thing. So, control back and forth, all these weird things are happening. Florida becomes the third state to succeed from the Union. And so they're the third state that decides, like, we want to be a confederacy. And so they had basically the militia which was loyal to the Confederates, had started already kind of being ready to take over the base, and the Confederates take over the base in 1862. I'm sorry, almost immediately they take over the base. In 1862, kind of as the Civil War is going on, they realize that it's kind of an unimportant place. It's kind of a fort inconsequential. I've called a few forts that: Fort Adams, Fort DeSoto. Nothing really happens on this base whatsoever, at this fort whatsoever. They decide to abandon it. And so in 1862, this fort goes back into Union control. So kind of this little pocket of the Union surrounded by Confederate forces, and yet still nothing ever really happens with it. In 1898, it's used for the Spanish-American War, once again because of its close proximity to Cuba. There are a lot of myths. There's a lot of lore about what has gone on in this base. There are, which I've never seen in a military base before, or in a fort before, there are several different prisons. So one of the stories going on is that a lot of people died in these prisons. That whether it was Union soldiers, whether it was Confederate soldiers, people had died in these little jails. And if you go there today, you can still see they've got old school ball and chains, right? And it's talked about a lot, the fact that there were these jails there for prisoners of war. So when you have prisoners of war, the odds of there being prisoners that died, prisoners that tried to escape, that were killed, all that kind of factors into things. Now, one of the important things that plays a factor in the history of this, and you see this a lot in abandoned forts or forts that are no longer active or have this history of up and down active service, is that during the Civil War and post Civil War, directly post Civil War, it was used as a plague house, and it's odd that rather than saying a quarantine, they used the term plague house. That this was some place where people who were suffering from yellow fever, although the dates are never given of when this happened, were brought to Amelia Island in Fort Clinch and died there. Very similar to the stories that are coming out of Key West and Fort DeSoto. This idea that when the crap hits the fan and plague numbers go up, we tend to use military bases as places of relief, right? Or at least places of isolation to get them away. And that makes sense. Like in Fort DeSoto, it makes complete sense that it was used because no one wanted to use it as a base, and it had all this land, and you only needed like 3 guys to run that place. So it makes sense that it would start to be used, and that has been confirmed, right? Like in their history, it says that that it was used to quarantine people going into Tampa, that it was really bad there at different times. It went through all these cycles. Fort Clinch is ridiculously haunted. One of the first level I've talked about are these comes from this plague, and that's plague children. And these plague children are described. I love, we really get graphic when we talk about, I'm talking about people who tell ghost stories, when we talk about children, right? All you have to do is say ghost kid, and you freak people out. Right? Like, that's the reason why we didn't do some legend trips in the beginning, right? Because ghost children automatically hit a nerve. They're described as having empty eyes. Sounds like it's once again a case of It's a case of black-eyed kids finding their way into Florida. So these plague kids, now I can only assume that people call them plague kids, and these kids are running around the base. People see them running around the tunnels. They see them running around the campgrounds. So if you can imagine, Fort Clinch is on the water, and it faces the tip, if you will. It's a pentagon facing out into the water. And actually, when you're at the base, you can see Georgia across the water, right? And the Atlantic Ocean is on one side, and Amelia River is on one side, the St. Mary's River. So it's got this, and then it's like, high walls, and then a very big open courthouse, like courtyard. These kids are seen playing around there. The only reason I can assume that they're considered plague kids is that there is no other history of the base of kids. So if there are random ghosts running around and they're kids and they've got empty eyes, they probably come from the plague. Another story is a Civil War nurse. Now, I'm going to read kind of what it says here, and I'm going to summarize the story, and then I'm going to kind of tell you about it a little bit. She is dressed like a nurse with a basket of bandages, and she seems to just be wandering around in one of the tunnel entrances between the hospital and the parade grounds. When she's approached, right, she seems very nervous, very running around. When she's approached, she disappears. So people see this woman. She's dressed like a nurse. She seems to be running around as if the base itself is being attacked, if you will, and she's trying to help people who need to be healed. And when she's approached by the living, she just disappears. Now, this woman has been approached and kind of written about in the first person, right? In several different books, several different websites, it talks about this happening. Then there is what I consider one of the most bizarre ghost stories that I have ever heard. Now, it's mentioned in this book, right? It's mentioned in pretty much every single website that talks about this place. And I'm going to tell you the story. So the story goes that some men were sitting on the porch. Some reenactors, we'll say, were sitting on the porch of the barracks. So the barracks, the door faces out, like the front door of the barracks faces into the courtyard. The porch faces like out towards the wall and towards the ocean. These men were on the barracks. These men were on the porch of the barracks, and out from the tunnel that's right there comes 4 Union soldiers, thinking that they are fellow reenactors. They call out to them. The men are ignored, and as the men get to come kind of closer and then start to like walk away the other way, they all disappear. Flash forward 1 year, and it's pretty much the same time of year, almost a year to the day. Some guys are hanging out. Same guys are hanging out. Same reenactors are hanging out on the porch. They see 3 men coming down the tunnel, and it's the same 3 men. They recognize these as the ghosts they saw the year before, but there's only 3 of them. So one of the men calls out, "Hey, where's your buddy?" The ghosts stop, turn and face the reenactors and say, "He didn't feel well enough to march," and then disappear. crazy story. If that is real, that has got to be one of the most unique ghost stories that I've ever heard, right? The base is haunted. All this stuff is going on. Let me tell you one story that happens in the midst of all this weird stuff that's going on there. Except for the fact, I feel like if you've never listened to the podcast, One Strange Thing, listen to it. Because I feel right now I am channeling her. You'll either love her or hate her. It's a great podcast. And she says, and that would be it, if not for one strange thing. I feel like I'm saying that now. This would be an amazing ghost story, except for one changing thing. I have read at least 5 different versions of this story. Now, we want to think, right? And we probably think in our minds, subconsciously or consciously, that if it's published in a book, it's the real story, right? Or it's the first version of the story, and all the other ones kind of follow along with it. I have heard different versions of this story. The most popular variation of it is that it's not a reenactor at all. It's actually a ranger at the park on his break in the back, sitting on the porch, who sees them 2 consecutive years. I've heard that they are Confederate soldiers and not Union soldiers. I've heard that they are headless. Now, this is interesting to me because if they're headless, how do they respond? But in the story, even with the headless ghosts, they still respond some variation of he's not feeling very well today, right? Other times the ghosts are less formal, right? Like she officially writes, he did not feel well enough to march. But I've heard it also that he's too sick to be here today. I don't know why I just said that in a somewhat body. No, he's too sick to be here today. He can't come. They probably didn't speak that way. But the idea is that all of these different ways that they communicate that the guy isn't there because he is sick. Who has ever friggin' heard of a ghost being sick? Let me rephrase, because I've heard a lot of stories about the ghosts of the sick, right? But a ghost who doesn't show up for a haunt because he's too sick. He ain't too sick one year, he's too sick the next year. Great story. And then there's the story. You know, I'm a hopeless romantic. You know, I got all the love in my heart. I love a ghostly love story. History Press ain't hammering about getting a Haunted Florida Love Stories Part 2, but I could easily do it with what I've discovered since I wrote that book. And Fort Clinch has the perfect love story. A soldier. In almost every version that I've heard, it's a Confederate soldier. I got you. Before I get to this, I just want to say, Jen in the chat room has said time slips. I totally agree with you. That is a 100% potential for why that happens, a time slip. Just really weird to have 2 time slips almost a year apart from each other, right? But it does have all the elements of that. Unless, of course, they are headless, in which case, headless time slips? Like, there's a lot of things going on there. I think that's why the story persists, is that you can play in that playground for a while. You can play with those time slips. You can play with the idea of a vortex there, or of nothing happening, someone hearing something and someone changes it. That's what makes it such a great urban legend. We're going to get into that part of it a lot more if we can talk to people when we go to the fort. I'm saying it as if it hasn't happened. But back to love. This is me doing my deep voice. Let me take a little bit more of my cuppa. Confederate soldiers stationed at the base. From the wall, he can see the South, right? I mean, yeah, he's in Florida, but he can see Georgia. He can see a land beyond where he is. He can see the ocean. What's more romantic than the ocean? And he's deeply in love. And he sits on that wall. I think it's the wall. He sits on that wall, and he writes a letter to the woman he loves, and he promises her, no matter what happens, I will not leave you. I will come back to you. My love will push me through this war. And then he dies! He never makes it back to his wife. But that promise continues to play itself out. And people say that they see a soldier dressed in Confederate, almost always Confederate army gear. Now, I've been told when I look at the reenactors, they always are dressed in Union outfits. I'm not even sure if they have Confederate reenactors that can be confused for this. Who's writing a letter, crying. And when he's approached, he disappears, just like the nurse. This man is stuck in this location because he promised his wife that he would come back to her, or the woman he loved, which may have been his wife or maybe his side piece, I don't know. And then he died in an ambush. When the fort was ambushed, he died and was never able to make it home. And he lingers there, hoping to be set free and find the woman he loves again. Incredibly romantic. All the elements of haunted love. The problem is, none of these stories could truly exist. Fort Clinch never had an ambush. I've been told that Fort Clinch never housed a female nurse. There never was any kind of quarantine set up in there whatsoever. No one ever died on the premises. The thing has been in existence in one way or another for 150 years, more than 150 years. No one has ever died at that location. There's no way that these ghosts could be there. And nothing consequential, right? So we talked about imprint when we were talking about rape. I never thought I would say that sentence before in my life. We were talking about the sexual assault in Jacksonville Beach. Nothing even that intense happened. It was one of the most boring places. It never shot its guns. It never had a battle. It was never attacked. It never serviced little kids dying of plague. And yet these stories persist. Now, I've got one issue with part of this. Or maybe it's just why do these stories exist then? Because forts are supposed to be haunted. We found the same thing, although there were plenty of people who died at Fort DeSoto, but it was never attacked. So the stories of people who seem to have died in battle that are at that fort can't possibly happen. But we think that these military locations at least, are hotbeds of paranormal activity. We associate army, we associate fort, we associate troops with death. So we naturally assume a place like that has to be haunted because bad shit had to have happened there. But not always the case.
one of the interesting things, I want to go back to the Plague Kids. That's going to be my next band name is Plague Kid. Place was never used as a quarantine. I looked here, right? No mention of plague. I searched the internet far and wide for any reference to Fort Clinch and plague. And here's what I found. The people who run it are very much pushing out any idea of there being ghosts there. When I posted my stuff, Mark Muncy, the writer Mark Muncy, had talked about there being him originally having he was supposed to be shooting something there for a show or for his web series. I'm not quite sure what. And at the last minute, Fort Clinch blocked it. I've heard that Ghost Hunters was there, like the TV show. I've heard it's hosted several different paranormal groups over the years who are kind of following up on this. The word from Fort Clinch is that it is not haunted, which is kind of, I think, paradoxical, right? Like, they say the place is not haunted. They say there are no ghosts there, and yet they've actually allowed a TV show to film there. And yet, they were then hesitant to let Mark and his group film there. The ranger that I can't talk about that yet. I can't talk about the ranger yet. Okay, you'll have to listen to the next episode to find out about the conversation I had with the ranger. But let me just say, they really say, almost with a wink and a nod, that this place is not haunted. It's an interesting atmosphere that their social media puts forth. I have posted 10 things at least about ghosts at Fort Clinch. Fort Clinch likes and reposts everything that I do, and my friggin' name is Tripping on Legends, and and my hashtags are all having to do with ghosts. If they really didn't want that reputation, that they didn't want to have people think that about them, why would they acknowledge my social media? Why would they encourage me? So it's an interesting little thing. As I searched for Fort Clinch and plague, as I searched for quarantine, one thing kept coming up time and time again, and that's that there's an area of Fort Clinch, as far as I can tell. It's either Fort Clinch or Fernandina Beach, which is known as Plague Beach. It's known as Plague Beach. Now, whether they're hiding something, like whether they're trying to push off this idea of it once being used as a quarantine, I can't find anything out about it. Or it's just someone hears the word Plague Beach associated with the fort. So many forts were used, and so they're superimposing ideas. But it's out there that there is this part that I'm going to totally have to follow up on, called Plague Beach. Why is it, Quarantine Beach. Why is it called Quarantine Beach? There are tons of these things. They're saying, hey, come to Fort Clinch. Use Fort Clinch for something. Like, buy us, right? It becomes, now they say it opens up as a state park in 1935. For some reason, every single place I go to says, the first state park. The question is, it is a question from the chat room, which is what I'm going to kind of leave you with tonight is, what is there to gain from denying that it's haunted? Cam asks this. Why would some place that is haunted say that it's not? Now, having a mystique or saying it flat out that it's haunted brings people in. Right? Like, I will pay my money to go there I will maybe pay extra money to try to spay the rodent. I will try to. It's so. Spoilers. I want the spoilers. You're going to have to listen to next week. But how about denying it? What do they gain from denying it? And the only thing that I can. There are two reasons for that. First is that if they are trying to present it as a legitimate historical place, right? If they're trying to protect the integrity of it as historical, you often find that places will deny any connection to the paranormal whatsoever because they feel to acknowledge it, to like give life to it, essentially takes away the credibility of it being historical. People aren't going to want to pay attention to the history because they're too busy loving, wanting to be there for ghosts, right? So every person that the reenactors are going to talk to are going to be like, "That's good. Okay, yeah, that's how they tell us about the ghost. Tell us about the ghost. Tell us about the ghost." It takes away the credibility. Some would feel takes away the credibility. That's something I've come across. I don't know, 25 years of working in this. People don't want to cross the streams between history and the paranormal because one dilutes the other. I don't agree with it. I think it's absolutely silly, but it's out there, right? And the second is to keep people out, right? You hear time and time again, I agree, ghosts are 100% history. If you want to tell a history story, tell a ghost story. If you want to get someone who's not interested in history, start them with a ghost story. That's kind of what we do here, right? Haunted locations have to be protected in a different way than a regular location. Once you say that something is haunted, you have dozens of groups that want to be going in, that feed groups that may not do it the right way. They're going to try to sneak in, right? You've got people who, think of all the cemeteries where people chip away headstones. Think about all the trespassing that goes along with haunted locations. Every abandoned hospital, week after week after week, you hear stories of ghost hunters or paranormal investigators who are doing it the wrong way and breaking into places and then getting caught. People who are doing it the wrong way and going in and trying to do wacky stuff. So there is a safety thing behind it as well, right? When you allow some place to be labeled as haunted, legitimate people and people who are not as legitimate find their way there, and it's not always something that you want to deal with. What you should want to deal with, though, is listening to Tripping on Legends and subscribing to the podcast. If you want to hear the follow-up of what happened when we actually went to Fort Clinch, or you want to hear any of the old episodes, like I said, we have over 150 that are up there. Please go to iTunes, go to TuneIn, go to Stitcher, go to Google Play, wherever you get your podcast. Type in Tripping on Legends or type in Christopher Balzano. You're going to find it. Subscribe. Please rate it. If you want to give me, it is a Happy New Year. I totally forgot to say at the beginning of the show. If you want to give me a late Christmas present, go into iTunes, go into wherever you listen to your podcast, and review the show. Even if it's not great, numbers of reviews that are out there draw people in, and so we would love to be able to have people express what they like and don't like about the show, and subscribe so you get it. Now that 2022, there's a major push by me. I already have five episodes in my noggin that are gonna be coming out. So there's going to be much more of a consistent and constant flow of material, and you can follow up. You can realize or get previews to what we're going to be talking about and the trips that are tripping through my mind. If you follow the social media at facebook.com/trippingonlegends, or if you follow the Instagram at Spooky Tripping or the Twitter at Spooky Balzano. Like I said, feel free to call me anytime at 813-418-6822, whether you've got a great story for whistling past the cemetery or just a local legend that you want to vent about. or an urban legend in Florida that you want us to try to explore and try to add our unique tripping on legends kind of angle to, we would love to hear from you. You can also email us at spookytripping at gmail.com. So a lot of ways to keep in touch with what's going on. For people who are in our live feeds, make sure you're following that social media this weekend as I'm attaching myself to a paranormal group where we're going out investigating, and I'm going to trip an old favorite of mine in a different way. So you want to make sure, and we'll have an episode on it, trust me. You want to make sure that you're following us as many ways as you possibly can so that you can see what our crazy, wacky, ghostly adventures are up to. I am Christopher Balzano for Tripping on Legends, and here's hoping that all of your trips are legendary.